Welcome to a deep dive
Oh, yeah.
into something I think many of us rely on perhaps a little too much: caffeine. We've got a
Right.
stack of fascinating sources here: scientific articles, medical websites,
Mm.
even some insights from the American Chemical Society. And our mission is to help you understand how caffeine truly works in
Yeah.
your body, from your brain to your heart to your sleep cycles.
It's about going beyond those assumptions, and equip you with the knowledge to make informed choices about your intake.
Exactly. And get ready for some surprises along the way, things even daily coffee drinkers might not know.
Okay.
So let's start with the basics.
Okay.
How does caffeine actually make us feel more alert?
Well, it all starts with understanding this naturally occurring brain chemical
Got
called adenosine.
Mm-hmm.
As the day goes on,
Okay.
adenosine gradually builds up in our brains, eventually signaling to our bodies that it's time to rest.
Okay, so adenosine is like Mother Nature's time for bed signal.
Precisely. But then comes caffeine,
Oh.
a molecule that has a remarkably similar structure to adenosine.
Mm-hmm.
This allows it to bind to the same receptors in the brain, essentially blocking adenosine from doing its job.
Wait, you're saying these molecules actually look alike? We have that American Chemical Society article here, and it's wild how much caffeine resembles adenosine.
Yeah, it's a textbook example of molecular mimicry.
Oh, wow.
Think of it like this. Caffeine and adenosine are like two keys that fit the same lock, but only one actually unlocks the door to sleepiness. Caffeine is that imposter key that gets stuck in the lock, preventing adenosine from turning it.
So instead of winding down, we end up feeling wired. I like that analogy. But while that alertness boost is what most people are after, I'm guessing there's more to the story, right?
Right.
What other effects does this molecular mimicry have on our bodies?
Right. Caffeine's impact extends far beyond just keeping us awake.
Yeah.
For instance, the WebMD article we have details how caffeine affects our nervous system. It initially increases dopamine, that feel-good chemical which can improve mood and focus.
So that's the initial upside. Yes.
But I've definitely experienced the downside too, that jittery, anxious feeling when I've had too much caffeine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And too much caffeine can also disrupt your sleep, even if you don't feel those immediate jitters.
Because it messes with our melatonin production, right?
That's right. We have a research article here from Yale that delves into this. Caffeine actually delays the release of melatonin, the hormone that regulates our sleep-wake cycle. So even if you can fall asleep after that late-night coffee, your sleep quality might be compromised.
This makes it crucial to create a sleep-conducive environment, right? I know the Yale article mentioned some helpful tips like dimming the lights and avoiding screens an hour before bed. I've tried that, and it definitely helps.
Small changes can make a big difference.
Yeah.
And on that note,
Yeah.
let's shift our focus from the brain to the heart.
Okay.
How does caffeine impact our cardiovascular system?
Well, I've heard that moderate caffeine intake is generally safe for healthy adults.
Yeah.
But I'm curious about those energy drinks with their super high caffeine content.
Those seem like a different beast altogether.
You're right to be cautious about those.
Yeah.
The WebMD article highlights how these highly caffeinated beverages can lead to abnormal heart rhythms and even slightly elevated blood pressure.
Okay.
The scientific research we have goes deeper, explaining that caffeine can disrupt the electrical signals that control your heartbeat, potentially leading to arrhythmias, especially in those who are sensitive or consume very high doses.
So it's not just about the amount of caffeine,
Right.
but also individual sensitivity.
Absolutely.
Right.
And it's especially important to be mindful of your caffeine intake if you have any pre-existing heart conditions. In those cases, consulting with your doctor is always a good idea.
Good point. Speaking of caffeine's internal effects, let's move down from the brain and heart to the stomach.
Okay.
That morning coffee can be a double-edged sword for digestion, can't it?
Right.
I know I've experienced some heartburn after my first cup.
That's because caffeine increases stomach acid production,
Okay.
as explained in the WebMD article. It can be particularly troublesome for people with GERD or acid reflux.
Makes sense. And finally, let's not forget the diuretic effect of caffeine. It's pretty hard to ignore those frequent trips to the bathroom after a big cup of coffee.
That's right. Caffeine increases urine production.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
From adenosine receptors to heart rhythms to bathroom breaks.
Yeah.
At this point, you might be wondering, is caffeine ultimately good or bad for you?
Well, that's where things get interesting.
Yeah.
And it's not a simple black and white answer. It really depends on individual factors like your sensitivity,
Mm.
your overall health, and your consumption habits.
Right, because the WebMD article also points out potential cognitive benefits of caffeine.
Yes.
For example, some studies suggest that it can improve memory and even test performance.
Mm-hmm.
And there's even research indicating it might offer some protection against Alzheimer's disease in older adults.
Yes, and the research on Alzheimer's is particularly fascinating.
Yeah.
Studies have shown that caffeine might help protect against the disease by blocking a harmful protein called beta amyloid from building up in the brain.
Wow.
It's like caffeine is acting as a shield against cognitive decline.
That's incredible.
It is.
But I also remember reading about the risks of caffeine dependence and withdrawal symptoms.
Right.
How do we balance those potential benefits with the risks?
That's a great question. It comes down to being aware of the complex ways caffeine interacts with your body and making conscious choices that align with your individual goals and health needs.
So it's not about demonizing caffeine entirely,
No.
but rather understanding its nuances and finding that sweet spot where you might reap the potential benefits without succumbing to the downside.
Exactly. It's all about balance.
Yeah. So we've talked about the good, the bad, and the nuanced when it comes to caffeine.
Yeah.
But since we know it can interfere with sleep, which is crucial for overall health, I'm curious to explore what the research says about optimizing sleep naturally. I know we have that Yale article with its good sleep recipe. What are some of the key takeaways there?
Well, this recipe is less about strict rules and more about working with your body's natural sleep-wake cycles.
Okay.
And it all comes back to adenosine, that sleep-inducing molecule we talked about earlier. The key is to allow adenosine to build up naturally throughout the day, so you have that nice sleep pressure by bedtime.
So we're talking about resisting those tempting afternoon naps.
Yes.
I'll admit, that's a tough one for me.
It can be tough. But think of it this way.
Yeah, okay.
Those long naps might feel good in the moment, but they can actually reduce your adenosine levels, making it harder to fall asleep later. It's like hitting the reset button on your sleep drive.
Okay, I'm starting to see the logic.
Yeah.
No more hitting the snooze button on my sleep drive.
Great.
And speaking of things to avoid, we can't forget about caffeine in the hours leading up to bedtime.
Absolutely. Remember, caffeine essentially outcompetes adenosine for those receptor binding sites, disrupting the natural sleep-wake signaling.
Yeah.
So cutting off caffeine several hours before bed is crucial to allow adenosine to do its job.
Makes sense. We want to give adenosine a fighting chance,
Right.
not have caffeine hogging all the space.
Exactly. And another key ingredient in the good sleep recipe is exposure to bright light in the morning.
This might sound counterintuitive, but it makes sense when you think about how our bodies are wired.
Right.
We have our internal clocks, our circadian rhythms that need those external cues to stay synchronized.
Precisely. Bright light, especially in the morning, helps regulate your circadian rhythm, signaling to your body that it's time to be alert and active.
I've actually started doing this myself, and I swear it makes a difference.
Good.
Even if it's gloomy outside, I open all the blinds first thing to let in as much natural light as possible.
That's great to hear.
Yeah,
Even small changes can make a big impact on your sleep quality.
right.
And the Yale article also highlights the importance of a consistent sleep schedule and a relaxing bedtime routine.
It's all about creating those healthy sleep habits.
Yeah.
So even on weekends, try to stick to a similar sleep-wake pattern.
Yes.
And having a relaxing bedtime routine to cue your body that it's time to wind down is crucial.
Exactly. Whether it's a warm bath, reading a book, meditation, or listening to calming music.
Yeah,
Whatever helps you de-stress and transition to sleep mode.
I love that. Now, before we wrap up our caffeine deep dive, I want to address a question that comes up often from our listeners, especially those who are pregnant or planning to become pregnant.
Okay.
What about caffeine during pregnancy?
This is where careful consideration is especially important.
Yeah.
The WebMD article offers some clear guidance recommending that pregnant women limit their caffeine intake to under 200 milligrams per day.
So that's roughly equivalent to about 2 cups of coffee.
Right.
But I recall the article also mentioned that even preconception caffeine intake above 400 milligrams daily could have negative effects.
That's right. Wow.
And the reason for this is fascinating. A fetus's body processes caffeine differently than an adult's.
Okay.
They lack a certain enzyme that's needed to break down caffeine efficiently. Wait, so you're saying even 2 cups of coffee a day could be risky during pregnancy? That seems strict.
It's all about weighing the potential risks and benefits.
Yeah.
The research shows that high caffeine intake during pregnancy is linked to a higher risk of miscarriage and low birth weight.
Wow.
And even before pregnancy, excessive caffeine consumption could potentially impact fertility.
That's really important information to be aware of.
It is.
And I want to emphasize that this is not meant to scare anyone, but rather to empower you with the knowledge to make informed decisions about your caffeine intake, especially during such a crucial time.
Exactly. Knowledge is power. And understanding how caffeine affects our bodies can help us make choices that align with our health goals and priorities.
So as we approach the end of our deep dive, I think the key takeaway here is that caffeine is a powerful drug that affects us on multiple levels.
Absolutely. It's not just about that morning pick-me-up. It influences our sleep, our mood, our heart health, our digestion, even our cognitive function, and potentially our long-term brain health.
Yeah.
And as we've seen, the optimal amount of caffeine varies greatly from person to person.
That's a crucial point. What works for one person might not work for another.
Right.
It's all about finding what works best for you and your unique needs.
Precisely. And this deep dive has hopefully provided you with a deeper understanding of how caffeine works in your body, so you can make those informed choices that support your overall well-being.
We've covered a lot of ground today,
We have.
from the molecular level to practical tips for improving sleep. But before we wrap up, we want to leave you with a final thought-provoking question to consider.
Imagine this.
Okay.
How might your life be different if you experimented with adjusting your caffeine intake based on what you now know?
Would you sleep better? Have more sustained energy throughout the day? Be less reliant on that afternoon caffeine fix?
We encourage you to reflect on your own relationship with caffeine, not just as a source of energy, but also as a substance that affects your mood, your sleep, your health, and your overall well-being.
It's all about taking control rather than letting caffeine control you. Maybe experiment with cutting back gradually or shifting your caffeine intake earlier in the day.
Even small tweaks can have a surprising impact. Pay attention to how your body responds. You might discover hidden energy reserves you never knew you had.
Maybe all those energy drinks were masking my inner powerhouse.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And remember, there are plenty of natural ways to boost energy. Good sleep, proper hydration, regular exercise. A balanced diet. Caffeine doesn't have to be the default solution for every slump.
You know, I remember when I was in grad school, I practically lived on coffee.
Oh,
I
well,
thought it was the only way I could survive those all-night study sessions.
you've all been there.
Uh,
I recall pulling all-nighters fueled by coffee during my residency.
oh, wow.
Looking back, I realized I was probably doing more harm than good, disrupting my sleep cycle and creating a dependence on caffeine.
It's easy to fall into that trap, especially when you're feeling the pressure.
Right.
But now, knowing what we know about caffeine's impact on sleep and overall health, it's like a whole new world has opened up.
I think that's the ultimate message we want to leave you with. You're in charge of your energy levels, and you have more options than you might realize. It's about making conscious choices that support your well-being.
So there you have it, our deep dive into the world of caffeine.
Yes.
Hopefully this has given you more than just a caffeine buzz.
We've explored the science, the benefits, the risks, and most importantly, the power of informed choice.
We hope you walk away from this with a newfound appreciation for this ubiquitous molecule and its profound impact on our lives.
And perhaps a little more control over your own caffeine destiny.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and happy caffeinating but wisely.